Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of She Talks Business. I am back here with Mackenzie, and this is our second last episode of the season. So, this is going to be a little bit of a roundup where Mackenzie's got just a bunch of random questions that she wants to ask. And then our next episode, we're going to turn the tables, and I'm actually going to talk to Mackenzie about her business. So, make sure you tune in next week so you can learn a little bit more about what Mackenzie does. So, if you're joining us for the first time and you don't know who Mackenzie is my niece, and she has started a new business. And we thought that it would be fun to record a season together where she could ask me any questions she wanted about business. And she has asked some really, really, really wise questions. And the reason that I wanted to do this is I think it's really important for even seasoned business owners to go back to beginner mind and to really think about the basics when it comes to running your business. It's easy to get caught up in the day to day of doing the same old, and forget what it was like to start. So let me tell you a little bit about Mackenzie. Mackenzie is a wellness counselor who specializes in the menstrual cycle, and she is on a mission to serve those who struggle with period problems through holistic practices. She uses her background in psychology and her diploma in wellness counseling to help people feel heard, and she offers alternative solutions so that they can not only feel their best, but have a better period naturally. Mackenzie, good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I can't wait to hear what you have in store for me today. I love this because I have no idea. And I think that's the best part. I never know what you're going to ask. And so it's a lot of fun. And I've been getting a lot of really positive feedback about the conversations that we've been having. So I think this was a really popular season.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's fun for me too to go in, and sometimes I know what I'm going to ask, and sometimes it just comes up naturally. So it's a great conversation to have.
Mm, for sure.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot, and I something that I'm coming up against, and we've talked about a little bit, is how do you actually sell? Like, how do you get your first sale? Yeah, what is there to it? Um, Tell me a little bit.
Well, I think those are two different questions.
Mm.
So one is how do you get your first sale? How do you get your first customer? And the other is how do you sell? And
Hmm.
so let's start with the second part of that question, which is how do you sell?
Hmm.
Because it's hard to get your first sale if you don't know how to sell. So I come from a retail background, and I learned how to sell, gosh, in my teens. In my early 20s, I was, managing sales teams in retail. In my 30s, I was managing $100 million sales team. So I have a lot of sales experience. And the one thing that I can tell you about selling is it's a skill. Selling isn't telling, selling isn't convincing. Selling is helping somebody make a buying decision.
Mm.
So there are some people that would say selling is about transference of belief. You are helping somebody to make a buying decision, and you are transferring belief that there is a better option or there is a solution to whatever it is they're looking to buy. And so when I think about selling, I always think that, the first thing that is important is to build a rapport with the person you're having a conversation with, because people buy from people they know, like, and trust. And if the very first thing you do is off-putting, then it's going to be hard to get them to like you and trust you. All right. If they don't like you, then chances are they're not going to trust you. And so you want to be able to build rapport. And typically, building rapport comes from just how you show up, how you interact with people. It's simple things like making eye contact, smiling, listening to them, maybe noticing something about them, like, noticing something they're wearing, or, if you are in B2B sales, maybe having done some research and being able to strike up a conversation about something that you have in common. So rapport building is important, and it doesn't have to take a long time, but it's a good way it's something that is important to keep in mind throughout the entire sales conversation. The next thing that is really important is your ability to uncover needs, because people don't buy things they don't need. People buy things that they need or they want. And the best way to uncover needs is by asking a lot of open ended questions. and listening very closely to what people tell you so that you can first and foremost discern, can I actually help this person? Because if you are asking questions about whatever it is that they're wanting to buy and or the solution they're looking for, and you don't actually believe you can help them,
Mm.
then it's kind of out of integrity to try to sell them something that you know isn't going to solve their problem. So you want to really listen deeply. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to ask questions, to acknowledge that you understand what they're telling you by paraphrasing it back to them, and then asking them, did you miss anything? Because
Mm.
sometimes, when somebody says something to you, the way you understand it and the way they communicated it are two different things. And so when you paraphrase something back to someone and say, am I hearing you correctly? You give them an opportunity to add on or to correct a misconception. And so that's a really important part of selling.
Mm.
So you're building rapport, you're asking questions to determine needs, you're paraphrasing back now because you want to make sure that you understand. And then you move to offering a solution. So, based on what you've told me, here's what I would recommend. And here's how I think this can help you and why. And you go into what that solution is. Now, you don't want to get into the weeds too much on a solution. I want you to think about going into Best Buy to buy a new computer. You go into Best Buy to buy a computer, and you want something that connects to the internet. You want something that you can use certain applications on. Maybe you want a certain amount of RAM for gaming or whatever, but you know what it is that you want.
Mm.
And when the sales associate goes down a rabbit hole and starts to, feature dump on you and talk all this jargon that you don't even understand, it doesn't help you make a buying decision. If anything, it confuses you because now what's happening is the story you're telling yourself is maybe this is too much for me. Maybe I don't need this laptop. Whereas if a good salesperson said, all right, I have this laptop here for you. And based on what you've told me, you need something that does this, 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 and this. Those 5 things can be done on this device. Let me show you how easy it is to do these 5 things. And they only talk about the things that you said you wanted. They would
Mm.
have a much better chance of actually doing the next step, which is closing the sale. And when you close the sale, you need to ask people what they'd like to do. Can you imagine if you went to a restaurant and the server just said, so what looks interesting on the menu? Oh, great, and walked away, and they never took your order? You need to be assertive enough to say to someone, do you think this can help you? Would you like to move forward?
Mm.
Which of these would you prefer? I have 2 options for you. Which sounds better? So you've got to learn to ask for the sale.
Mm.
And a lot of people struggle with that. They dance around it. And it's awkward for the buyer when the salesperson is awkward and not confident enough to say, so what would you like to do? And it
Mm.
doesn't need to be a hard close. It can be as simple as, do you think this could help you? And if I say yes, then you say, great. Would you like to get started? So it's really just being able to have a good conversation with someone, understanding what the problem is, offering the solution, and then being brave enough to actually ask them if they'd like to move forward. That's the basics of selling. Okay. Now,
Mm.
depending on the type of industry you're in, some sales take a lot longer to close because you need to have multiple meetings and you need to write proposals and you need to get stakeholders to agree and things like that. But I think for most people listening to this podcast, we just want to understand the basic fundamentals of how to sell. There are a lot of great books out there on selling, and I can put some of them in the show notes if people are interested. But I think just understanding the basics, selling is helping someone make a buying decision. It's not convincing, it's not coercing, it's not trying to manipulate. It's about really being of service and only trying to sell something that you believe can help. And so that's kind of the how I would approach selling in a
Mm.
nutshell. And if you don't know how to sell, I would highly recommend getting a part-time job in retail or getting a part-time job, and people are going to laugh when I say this, in a network marketing company so that somebody can teach you how to sell. Now, not everybody loves network marketing. I get it. I haven't done anything in network marketing for like a million years, but when I was younger, I did do some things in network marketing, and I have a huge appreciation for the repeatable systems that they put in place to teach people to be successful when it comes to selling. Same goes for retail. Not mom and pop retail, but bigger retail organizations like national retail chains. Most of them have a system for selling. And so when you work for one of these organizations, even if it's for a short period of time, you learn the skill of selling, and that skill will serve you for a long time in life, especially if you're a business owner. You don't really have a business until somebody buys something. And so learning how to sell is one of the most important skills to being able to have a business that is sustainable. When I work with my clients, one of the things that I teach them is to think about how they can generate sales versus being an order taker. An order taker is very passive. You're waiting for somebody to come to you. So let's go back to the restaurant example. An order taker is at a food truck. You walk up to the window and you say, I want this, 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 and this. And they say, okay. Whereas you go to a nice restaurant and they say, would anybody like an appetizer? Let me tell you what the specials are. Would you like to add Béarnaise sauce with that steak? Would you like a side of mushrooms? Would
Mm,
you like some dessert? Would you like an after dinner drink? Would you like a coffee after dinner? Like a good server is adding on. They're actually taking the lead in trying to sell. They're not being an order taker. And in business, when it's a service-based business, there's a lot of things that you can do to prospect and show up in the right places for people who want to buy. And if you're not doing those things, then you're probably behaving more like an order taker, and you're leaving sales, you're leaving business to chance versus being the type of business owner that can generate. Now, if you are new to business, you might be thinking, okay, Lisa, I don't even know where to go to generate sales. And that's a fair point. You haven't had sales yet. I can tell you that my experience is get out and go to networking events, meet people at networking events, get comfortable talking about what you do with different people, get on the speaking circuit. Even if this is like little tiny places that you go and speak to start, speaking is a great place to convert business. Go to events, not just networking events, but go to other events where you can meet people that might be interested. But figure out where are the places that are going to help you to generate interest in what you do.
mm,
So that kind of ties into how do you get sales? So, really what you want to do is you want to um, be at the intersection of where your buyer is browsing. And so you really need to understand who your buyer is, and you want to show up and be in places where your buyer hangs out. And a lot of people are best kept secrets. They don't put themselves out there. They don't do any marketing. They don't go to events. If they do marketing, they're tentative. They don't do enough volume of marketing in order to show up. They're not actively looking for places where their buyers hang out. And so it's difficult because you have to do some research to figure out where are my buyers
mm,
and where do people who need whatever the product or service is that I offer hang out. And so um, demonstrating your thought leadership through blog content, video content, marketing, getting out to events, meeting and interacting with people and talking about what you do. It's a lot of pavement pounding in the beginning, just so people know who you are. And that is typically how you end up generating interest. And that interest is how you end up generating your first sale.
I love you started this saying that you love coming into this because you don't know what I'm going to ask. And I love coming into this because I think I know what you're going to say. And then it's completely opposite. And it really opens up my mind. And I was taking some notes because as you were talking about sales, what really struck me was the similarity to counseling. Like you were talking about building rapport and active listening and paraphrasing. And it got me thinking of how we all have soft skills that can apply to sales. And I'm really curious if there's other than retail and going into places that will teach you how to sell and those processes and systems, what are some soft skills that people have that are often overlooked when they come to you and they're like, well, I just don't know how to sell?
Asking good questions, being able to listen and paraphrase back. I think those are really important soft skills because what happens with most people is when they ask questions, they're listening to respond. They're not listening to understand. And so if you are listening to respond, you're thinking about what you want to say. You're not
Mhm.
really listening to what someone is saying to you. And
Mhm.
so I encourage people to really listen to understand. When you listen to understand, it's like you're leaning in, you're really listening, you're asking questions to go deeper and probe. And I think that's probably one of the most important soft skills. And I can see why wellness counseling would teach you how to do that. And
Mhm.
so I think that's probably one of them. Um, what is another soft skill? I think building rapport, just being able to build a relationship with people is definitely a soft skill. Being observant, being able to notice things that you could have a conversation with somebody about. I mean, if you just look at my office right now, there's a whole bunch of things that you could ask me questions about. There's a bunch of dogs behind me, right? There's a picture of me with Oprah. There's another picture with friends. There's a painting. Like there's things that you could build rapport with me very easily just by noticing what's going on around the person that you're talking to. And so I think that's another soft skill that is important.
I can really resonate with the rapport building. And as you talk about sales, I'm noticing that when you're describing the scene in the restaurant with someone who's confident and someone who's taking the lead, even though I know I'm being sold to, it feels comfortable. Where do you think people get into that feeling of like sales can make people feel really uncomfortable? And why do you think that is?
Because they're attached to the outcomes and they're worried about themselves. They're not worried about helping someone else. So if you're actually concerned more about helping someone else, you show up differently. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're just worried about, oh, are they going to buy and how much can I get them to buy? And you're attached to the outcome, that's where sales feels manipulative and it feels like trickery because you're now telling yourself a story. You're telling yourself a story maybe about your self-worth and your ability to close a sale. You're telling yourself a story about how much somebody might spend and you weave all of these kind of money mindset issues into selling. A lot of people have been raised by, they've been told selling is bad and oh, you don't want to be like a used car salesperson. You hear all this stuff. And so I think that and money is bad, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that some of those beliefs from childhood come along with us. And if you can just really think of selling as coming from a place of service, I'm trying to help you. I
Mm-hmm.
want to help you. And so when I go to a restaurant and somebody like, and they don't do their table checks, they don't check to see how I am, they don't ask if I'd like, the sides, they don't, one of the stories I told years ago was when your uncle and I built our first house, the contractor who was building the house sent us to Home Depot to buy light fixtures. And so we had a list of light fixtures by room that we needed to buy. And we walked into the lighting department and, this guy, hey, can I help you guys with anything? No, no, we're good. We're just looking because, of course, we don't want to be sold.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a list. We knew what we wanted. And we just wanted to putter around. And so we ended up with 2 carts full of light fixtures. And this guy came and checked on us a couple times while we were there. And every time we're like, no, no, we're good. We're good. We're good. And then as we were leaving the lighting department, he said, excuse me. And we turned around and looked. He said, would you like some help finding light bulbs for all of those light fixtures? Light bulbs wasn't even on our radar.
Mm-hmm.
So if he had taken it personally when we said, no, we don't want your help 3 times, he never would have come back and said, hey, do you guys need help finding the light bulbs to go with all those light fixtures? And we would have ended up at home with a bunch of light fixtures for electricians to install with no light bulbs because our contractor didn't tell us to buy light bulbs. He told us to buy light fixtures.
Mm-hmm.
So I always think of that story as a classic example of somebody who was really trying to be of service. He wasn't afraid to approach us yet again. He didn't take it personally when we said, no, we're okay, we're fine, 3 times to him. He just
Mm-hmm.
kept checking in. And when he saw us leaving the department, he's like, okay, I know what they need next. He was anticipating what we would need next. That's coming from a place of service. And so I think it's important to really think about if you cared about helping this person, whatever it is you're selling, how would you behave? How would you show up? And if you really care about helping someone, you're not attached to whether they buy from you or not, because you're attached to helping them make the right buying decision. There are times where I have had sales conversations with people and I have said, you're not ready to work with me yet.
Mm,
I don't want you to invest based on the size of your business and what you're telling me you want to do over the next 12 months and what I believe is reasonably possible for you and how much it's going to cost you to invest in working with me. I don't think the timing is right for us to work together. Whereas I could have done the opposite. I could have been like, oh, I can help you do that. I can help you build your list. We can get your website here. We can do this. And I could have sold them a dream that
mm,
I didn't really believe was possible.
mm,
That's not being, that's not coming from a place of service. That's coming from a place of trying to get the sale. And so if you're just trying to get the sale, you care about you. If you're coming from a place of service, you care about offering something that's going to be of value to them. There is one other thing, though, Mackenzie, that I think is important to talk about here
mhm,
is in the service-based industry, a lot of times what people do is instead of having a sales conversation, they end up in a like a consultative mode and they give away everything that they know for free. And
mhm,
that's not what selling is about. Selling is about uncovering a need and being able to let the person know how you can serve them, what the solution is. Selling isn't about spending an hour solving the problem for somebody, because then what do you have to sell? You don't
mm,
have anything to sell. And I
mhm,
think because what you know is you, it's often challenging for people to put a value on that because they look at it as it's just what I know. And what I have experienced is that a lot of people who are really good at things that other people are not good at think that everybody knows what they know. And therefore, they diminish the value of what they bring to the table and they give it away for free and they hamper themselves from being able to actually drive sales.
I think that's definitely, I know that's something I've come up against and we've talked about of wanting to be, like you said, in the service industry, wanting to be of service and thinking that being of service means that you do it free and that that information or that knowledge or that service or that money somehow is the antithesis to service, but it's what I'm hearing and what I know is that it's not.
Look at how much money you have spent on university.
Mm-hmm.
Look at how much money you spent on your wellness counseling. Like, look at all the money you have invested in learning what you know. There's value in that.
Mm-hmm.
I look at, my own business. I've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in my growth and development. So why would I assume that just because it's easy for me that it's easy for everyone else? It's not. So
Mm-hmm.
you've got to have the confidence to know that there's value in what you offer and charge for it accordingly.
There's value and that it's okay to accept money for that knowledge and that it's like an energy exchange. That's something that I tend to think of when I'm trying to shift my money mindset is that money, knowledge, all of these things are just different forms of energy exchange.
Mhm.
And you talked about getting your first sale and I love that it was very much in person and it what's really cool about this conversation that I'm realizing is that selling seems more like a way of being rather than a certain conversation that you're having. And at what point, so let's say I've gotten my first sale, someone listening has gotten their first sale. I'm noticing that there's a bit of panic in me of, okay, I've gotten my first sale. And
Now
then,
what?
yeah, now what? So now what? What comes next?
Deliver more than they expect.
Mm,
So, I love John Maxwell. I think he's a really great leader. He's written a lot of books. He talks a lot about leadership. And one of the things that he talks about is always deliver more than what people expect. And so think about the value that you want to deliver and show up and do it. I think it's important when you are in the sales process that you let people know what happens next.
mm,
So if somebody wants to do strategy work with me, for example, I do this thing called a strategic marketing roadmap. And my team and I work together and we build out basically a strategic marketing plan for an organization. And when I'm in conversation with people, I tell them, okay, so this is what's going to, when I sell them and they say, yeah, I think I want to do that. I'm like, okay, so here's what's going to happen.
Mm.
The first thing we're going to do is we're going to find a date in our calendar that works for both of us, and we're going to put it on the calendar. The second thing that's going to happen is I'm going to send you a detailed intake form. You need to fill that out and send it to me at least 48 hours before the date where we're going to meet. Then we're going to meet and we're going to spend 2 hours talking about your business. And during that conversation, I'm going to record it so that you get a copy, because a lot of people tell me that what they get out of that conversation was worth the price of the entire strategy. So you're going to get a copy of that. After the strategy session, we're going to work on the discovery phase. This is where we work on the background of what your business is all about, who your buyer is, and what the most important goals are. We're going to summarize that background. We're going to send it to you within 10 business days, and we're going to get you to bless it, because we don't want to build an entire strategy on a misunderstanding. So you'll receive that by such and such a date. From there, we're going to work on the rest of the actual strategy, and we will schedule a follow-up call with you, probably about 4 weeks later. During that call, there's going to be 2 deliverables. One is an overarching plan that explains the strategy, and 2 is the detailed roadmap. We're going to go through these things with you. We're going to go over the big plan, and I'm going to give you the roadmap. And you're going to go away and read that roadmap. And then, usually about a week later, you and I will meet again. Once you've had time to read the roadmap, you've had time to digest all of the different recommendations, and we'll have a conversation about where you want to go next. That's what's going to happen. So, because I can map out that process, I now have a buyer that feels confident because they know what's going to happen from A to Z. And
Mm.
so the now what question shouldn't come up after the sale. It should be part of the sale. So
Mm.
mapping out your own process of what you're going to do and how you're going to help somebody is part of, you need to know what you're selling. If you don't know what you're selling, then it's going to be really hard to sell it. And so I recommend that you focus on a program versus an hourly fee. You can
Mhm.
definitely do hourly fees if you want, but I would be thinking about a program. Here's what's going to happen over a 6-week period. First, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. Or here's what's going to happen over a 90-day period. Or here's what's going to happen over the next 7 days. Like, figure out what the process is for how you apply your service so that your customer knows what they're getting and what they should expect.
That's such a helpful response because as you were talking, I was realizing that, of course, having the infrastructure, not even the infrastructure, but the plan and the process in place before that, if I don't know now what, then the person sitting across from me doesn't know now what, and then we're both confused. So what ideally should I or someone have in place? You mentioned programs and thinking about the process. So is that something that people should have an idea of before their first sale?
Yes. Unless you're just going to sell something hourly.
Mm.
So the very, 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 very first thing I sold was my time by the hour. And like, it was, I think I sold it for $200 for a 60-minute coaching session. And I just sent an email out to my list, and I offered this one time, this coaching call for X amount of dollars, blah, blah, blah. And somebody replied to my email and said, I'd like to do that. I was like, oh my God, I have a sale. So unless you're trading time for dollars, if you're trading time for dollars, then you could just do that. But if
Mm.
you're actually going to engage in a journey with somebody, you need to know what that looks like. If it's coaching, how many coaching calls? How long are the coaching calls? When do you meet? Are they on Zoom? Are they recorded? Is there an intake process? Is there prep work? Is there assessments? Like, you need to just let somebody know what are the nitty gritties. You have to be able to explain the details of whatever the program is that you're offering them.
Mm. And
And
what
that
is that?
doesn't mean that doesn't mean you have to have it all figured out either.
Mm.
So, I've launched a new program in 2024 called Hype, and it's a high performing entrepreneurs, and it's a group coaching program. And when I sold this program the very first time from a stage, in 2023, I just said, I have this idea for a program for next year, and here's what it's going to look like. We're going to meet once a month for 90 minutes to 2 hours, and we're going to talk about this and this and this and this, and we're going to do this and this and this, and we're going to have best practices, peer-based best practices. And I talked about what I envisioned, and then I talked about the outcome that I wanted entrepreneurs to get from this program, and people bought it. Now I have to take that framework and I have to deliver on it, which I can. But just because you put together, okay, a framework for something doesn't necessarily mean you've done it yet. But you need to think through, what are the steps? What is the process, right?
Having the framework and it, but not having to be perfect.
Exactly.
I I'm really curious because when I think about having the framework, what immediately comes up for me is if I haven't done it yet, there's that insecurity or that fear. How would you change that mindset, especially in our conversation of selling, to it being more exciting that you haven't done it yet? Like your example of being on stage, you hadn't gone through that step yet, but you were confident enough in your ability to execute.
I think knowing that you can change the process when you're in it.
Mm,
So I'm going to give you an example. Last year, I did a peer performance group. It was a group coaching program for 6 months. A franchise brought me in to work with their top performing franchise owners. And I had done group coaching before, but I'd never done really peer based coaching. So it's a
mm,
little bit different because I'm now facilitating. I'm not the one that has to have all the answers. I'm trying to facilitate best practices amongst high performers. So it's a little bit different. I need to lead and guide, but
mm,
I'm trying to get them to share best practices and help each other. And when I first started this out, I was pretty hardcore, and then we're not going to record these conversations because they're confidential and blah, 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 blah. And then I realized as we kept going that I really needed to record the conversations because not everyone could make every call. And so I started to see that people who couldn't make every call, they wanted the notes, and they were upset that they couldn't make every call. And so I went back to them and I said, okay, when we first started this, we said this, this, and this, and I'd like to change it. Instead, I'd like to do this, this, and this. And because I think it's going to provide better value for all of you. If anybody has any opposition to this, please let me know. Everybody was happy with it. So I think being confident enough to know that when you're in it, you can still change things up. You're the expert. You
mm,
could say to somebody, hey, I know I said that we were going to meet every other week, but I really think that we should meet weekly. I really think that based on the situation, I'd like to offer you a couple of extra coaching calls. Maybe we can reduce the calls from, 90 minutes to 60 to 75 minutes. And I'd like to add a couple in between touch points because I think it's going to help you progress better. Like, you can give more. What you don't want to do is take away. So you don't
mm.
want to tell somebody, I'm going to give you 10 coaching calls and then be like, I think we only need 5, because now they're going to feel like they didn't get enough. So
Right.
you're always better to under promise and over deliver than to, cram everything in. So I like to give people surprises. I
Mm,
like to be like, okay, you're going to get this, this, and this, and then be like, oh, and guess what? I have this for you too. Because
right.
then people feel good. They feel like they're getting extras. They're getting a bonus, right? So I'm in this financial wisdom program this year with John Maxwell. And every month I get a signed copy of a book that is related to finance, which I think is just lovely because I didn't know, they didn't tell us that we were going to get that at the very beginning. And so it's really nice to get that snail mail, and every month I get a book and it's a signed copy of the book, and it's kind of it's just a little thing, but it's added value. So you're better to have less in your programming and then add stuff that really delight and surprise people.
I'm really hearing a through line of adaptability and that the experience is more dynamic than fixed. Like we're not going in with, I have my whole framework, my program, and there's no room for changes. And also, I'm hearing, or my understanding of it is those ideas that you have that you're not quite sure about, it's better to weave them in as you go and see what the need is, talking about meeting needs rather than trying to cram it all in and then having to take it away because it's too much for maybe you as a facilitator or a coach to deliver on.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, probably very much like counseling. You
Yes.
can't, if somebody is going for wellness counseling or even they're going for therapy, you can't fix everything in the first session. It takes time.
Hmm. Where do you think that belief comes from, that as someone who's starting out in business, that you have to fix people's problems? Like you have to, at least this is something I've come up against, is there's so much pressure on that first meeting of I need to fix something or I need to have this grand revelation, which is actually something that we talk about in counseling, is that need to fix the problem for the person sitting in front of you.
Well, I think that comes back to you being attached to the outcome for you versus doing what's right for them. And
Mm.
so I think if you just show up and like for me, it's it takes time. So I have a new coaching client that I started working with last year. And the first few calls, it's a little, I'm going to say it's a little bit clunky because I'm getting to know their business. Their business model is different from a business model that I have worked with before. It
Mm.
doesn't mean that I'm not helping them. It doesn't mean that I'm not learning. It doesn't mean that we're not progressing. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get on the same groove, right?
Mhm.
That's why for me, intake forms and gathering as much information as I possibly can up front is helpful for me because then I can ask, clarifying questions and I can get to know what somebody needs more. Another
Mhm.
thing that you can do is at the end of every session, if it's a service-based thing, is just ask somebody, what was valuable about our session today for you? And you might be surprised at what they tell you.
Mm. I love that response because it's best practice in counseling as well to, at the end of the session, say what was a takeaway, what worked, what didn't. And it's really, the sales relationship, I'm realizing, is no different than any other relationship. In the beginning of any friendship, relationship, connection, there is a getting to know, there's a clunkiness, there's a exchange, but like you said, that doesn't mean that you're not adding value.
Mhm. I think
Mhm.
what's important though is you are the service provider. And so you as the service provider need to do your due diligence. You need to show up over prepared. If the
Mhm.
clunkiness is there, it shouldn't be because you didn't do your homework before you showed up. It should just be a natural part of the process. And so um, I think sometimes people who have been selling for a long time, not necessarily people who are trying to get their first sale, they almost get complacent and they don't do the work up front to ensure that the first impressions are really strong. So don't lose that need to make a good first impression and by failing to do the homework that you should do.
Mm. Thank you for that distinction of that there's still the preparation and that the clunkiness isn't because you're unprepared. It's just a natural part of the process.
Mhm.
Mhm. This has been such a great conversation. I'm trying to think of what else I want to ask you because you're so rich in knowledge. Uh, when you were talking about, again, back to the first sale, I'm imagining in person, and obviously my background is in counseling. I'm thinking of the physical response that some people might have to sales. What is something that you've practiced when you've been, because we've talked about stretching that capacity, taking a little, our steps. What's something that you've practiced in a moment where maybe you've wanted to shy away from a sale that's right there, and taking, what's the difference between taking that step and letting that sale go out of fear?
I don't know if I can answer that because I don't know that I've ever let a sale go out of fear.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't, yeah, I don't know that I've ever let a sale go out of fear. I think I've always naturally just been good at sales.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I'm not sure I can think of a time, but I can see, I can tell you from my retail experience, I've had team members where they're telling themselves a story about someone not being ready to buy
Hmm.
versus actually following the process to ask if someone wants to buy. And so they fail to close the sale because they make an assumption that somebody doesn't have enough money. And so I used to play this game when I worked in retail because people would walk into my store and my sales rep, I was a store manager at the time. It wasn't my stores and I owned it, but it was my stores and I managed it. And I remember I used to play this game where the sales rep would say to me, "Oh, she's just looking." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, watch. I'm going to get her to buy something." So then I would go approach the customer and I would start the whole sales process. And the next thing you know, I'd have like a $500 sale. And so I think sometimes gamifying it a little bit, making it a little bit fun. When you get no really, really fast, when you get those no vibes, go back to asking questions. Because
Mm,
normally it's because you didn't uncover enough need. Maybe you were selling too soon. Maybe
mm,
you're trying to sell something without really understanding what the customer needs, and therefore you weren't able to connect the dots. And so when that discomfort happens, and you want to step back in kind of intimidation, it's usually because you haven't uncovered enough information or built strong enough rapport. So just ask more questions and see where it goes.
I love that. The gamifying, the making it fun. And it really is a learning experience and a learning curve because I could imagine even with sales experience, it's one thing to sell when it's for someone else, and then it's another thing to sell when you are the sale or your knowledge
Hmm.
is the sale, and being okay with it being a practice. Like my first time I have that sales conversation and I stretch that knowledge or feeling and go for it. If it's a no, just looking at it as a learning experience and rather than a failure or that I'm no good at sales or yeah, the story.
You should expect no's. No one
Mm,
has a 100% conversion rate.
mm,
And no doesn't mean no permanently. It just means no, not now. There are lots of times where I've had conversations with people and they're like, I need to think about it. Okay. And then they come back 6 months later, or sometimes it's like 3 years later, and they're like, okay, I'm ready now.
mm,
Sometimes depending on what you're selling, your buyer has their own mindset issues around money.
mhm,
And you selling is not convincing. So if you think that my fee is too expensive, well, it's not up to me to convince you if you're not ready to make that type of investment in you. And
mm,
so I think that you should expect conversion rates to not be 100%. If you're closing, let's say 1 in 3 sales in the beginning, 1 in 4 sales, you're probably doing a good job.
mm,
Don't expect it to be 100% because it's not going to be.
mm,
But, one of the things I taught a client of mine to do years ago is I had her create a sales sheet. And on the sales sheet, she had different questions that she could ask to uncover needs. And then she had a scoring system on the sales sheet for how did she do? Did she do a good job building rapport? Did she do a good job asking questions? Did she do a good job closing the sale? And did she get the sale? And so she had this file folder, and every single time she had a sales conversation, she would fill out this form with the person's name and all the information, and she would take notes on it, and she would rate herself on how she did and what she did well and what she could do better next time. And
mm,
her conversion rate improved dramatically over time because she was like looking at the data. She was looking at her own self evaluation. But not only that, she now had this folder full of leads that she could go
mm,
back to and follow up and nurture and take care of so that she could create another opportunity to potentially sell to them. So make it fun,
mm,
gamify it a little bit. Don't be so like, scared and worried about it. You're no worse off if they say no. Nothing's changed, right? You're no worse off today if somebody doesn't buy from you than you were before you had the conversation. You're in the same state, same spot. So, what have you got to lose? Like, don't be attached.
Detachment is another through line of this podcast, which I think is really, really helpful. And I think I'm probably going to take that idea of the evaluation and the data, and I really love how it's putting it. Really, it is putting, like you said at the beginning, making. How did you describe sales?
It's selling is being of service. It's helping somebody make a buying decision.
Helping someone make a buying decision, being of service, and it really being in their hands. And even that that switch, that mindset shift of you're no worse off. Why wouldn't I? Or why wouldn't the person listening try it on for size? Why wouldn't you throw it out there to be like, hey, this is something I think I could help you with? Because the risk isn't actually as big as what I think our nervous system and our minds make it out to be.
Mm-hmm. And there's so many great books about selling. I mean, The Challenger Sale is a really great book. Colleen Francis's new book, Right on the Money, it's a really great sales book. Julie Thomas has a new book called, I think it's called Value Selling, something like that. That's not the exact title. I'll get it. But there's lots of great books out there on how to sell if people really want to learn how to sell.
And
Even
learn.
in my book, Pilot to Profit, there's a whole section in that book on selling.
And those books are great for replacing the narrative that sales are bad, especially like the value based or being of service. It really shifts the perspective that I think a lot of people need to be able to comfortably step into that role, especially when
Mhm.
it's their own business.
Mhm. Yeah, there's definitely a difference there, okay? So, I will tell you, I've sold a lot of things in my life, and there is a difference in selling a widget that you didn't make for a company that you don't own and selling your own service that is you, fulfilled by you, created by you. There's a little bit of mindset stuff that comes up there, in the beginning, and you can get it's easy to get over that though, but it is definitely different when you're selling you versus selling a thing.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me when you're talking about it's easy to get over. Before this conversation, I might have felt like had my own protests. Like that's not easy to get over. But what I've learned from this podcast series and from talking to you over the years is really just stepping through that fear. Like that fear is going to come up, and it's up to us to decide if that's where we're going to stop. Like, is that fear just going to stand in front of us, or are we going to be like, okay, the way through this is to actually do it?
Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
also think that that's why creating a program or productizing your service offering, it's a lot easier for me to sell a strategic marketing roadmap because it's a deliverable than it is to say, well, why don't you just spend some time with me and we'll do blah, blah, blah. Like it's different.
Right.
So when you actually can call your program, your service something, and you've got structure around it, it's easier to sell that thing than to just sell you.
Mm. So creating, it's kind of like combining the widget for a different company and selling yourself. It's creating something outside of yourself that you can deliver.
Mm,
My
yeah.
last question is, what's the last time someone really impressed you with their sales?
Mm. When's the last time someone impressed me with my sales? I have to tell you, the last time someone impressed me with sales in general is actually Cass Bald, who's a manager on my team.
Mm.
Uh, I've been in this business, I think, since 2008. Like it's been a long time that I've owned this business. And I would say that until this year, until up until the end of 2023, or actually going into 2023, I would say I was sold 99.9%. I closed that much of the business. And in 2023, Cass Bald on my team really started expansion selling
Mm.
to some of our existing clients. And instead of, she started looking for opportunities to be able to do more things. She started quoting work on her own. And I even got to a point where I had clients that were interested in certain things and I sent them to her. And she has been able to close some significant amounts of business. And
Mm.
so for me, it's really great to see that she has been able to do that in her role and that she is taking seriously the responsibility of helping to grow the business versus me being the only one that does that. And so, that's the person that comes to mind for me in my business right now who has impressed me the most recently. Um, I'm trying to think about any other experiences that I've had as of late. I can't think of any place else. I mean, it's sad to say, but I do so much shopping online now that it's not the same when you have that in-person experience.
Mhm.
I was actually thinking about retail when we were talking, and I was thinking, gosh, when I worked in retail and I put somebody in the fitting room, I would bring clothing back to them. I would bring add-ons. Hey, we just got this in. I want to show you this thing. Hey, how did those pants fit? Do you want to try a different size, style, different size? Like, I was so good at selling in the fitting room.
Mm.
And today you go into a store and you go to the fitting room and you're lucky if somebody even comes and asks you if everything fits okay. And so I feel like we've lost the art of selling.
Mhm.
When I was in Orlando last year, I so excited. We went to this really, really great mall and I was ready to shop. And I walked into a Banana Republic. And the first three people that I walked by were all on their phones, salespeople, sales associates on their phones, looking at their phones. And I did a loop at the store. And as I went to leave, another person on their phone said, "Can I help you with anything?" And I'm like, "No, nobody's trying to help anybody here. You're all too busy on your phones." And I walked out. And I'm
Mhm.
a big banana shopper. And it really offended me that people who are supposed to be there to serve customers are so on their phones that nobody's taking care of the customer anymore. And so I think that means that there is a great opportunity that
Mm.
exists out there for retailers, because for the retailers that can bring back really good customer service, there's an opportunity to sell a lot more.
Mhm.
Retailers are teaching customers to shop online because there is no service in store.
Yeah, why would you go into a store when you're not getting that
Yeah.
and it's even just human connection and the care, and as we were talking about in the beginning, the building rapport. And what I love about the example with Cass too is that this conversation has really shifted my mindset around sales. And one of those things is when you're selling more, you're also promising to deliver more. So that's that's just something that from that example really stood out to me, that it's a taking on of more responsibility and saying that you want to help, which is
Yeah.
very different than what I came into this conversation thinking of. So thank you.
You. Thank you. Good questions, Mackenzie. I love talking about sales. I think I could talk about sales all day, every day. Like, to me, selling is just it's such a fascinating thing to do, because I really do believe that it's about helping people make a buying decision. It's not about convincing. It's really about coming from a place of service. And when you can do that without attachment to the outcome, I think you can become a really great salesperson.
And in that vein, this the sales, because all of life is we're constantly being sold things, we are
Mhm.
constantly in the economy buying things, so seeing yourself as a guide to those buying decisions and helping to make a more educated buying decision, it really shifts it to, like I just said, the more responsibility. Like in my business, letting someone talk about their period and not saying, oh, there's something I could help you with or something that could help you, that's helping someone make a better buying decision that with information that they probably wouldn't have had before. So it's
Mhm.
really shifting it to being more like a guide than the convincing and the image or the archetype we have in our head, like the used car
Mhm.
salesman.
Yeah. So be a good guide, but don't forget to ask for the sale.
Yes, that's also the important caveat.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to this episode of She Talks Business. I think this was a great conversation on selling, and we're in the new year, and so you've got lots of time to sell this year and to hit the sales goals that you've set for yourself. So hopefully, this gives you a little bit of fuel to do that. And I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you listen in on the next one, because I'm going to put Mackenzie in the hot seat and ask her all about her business. So thank you, Mackenzie, for being a great interviewer on this season. I've really enjoyed our conversations.
Me too. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. Until next time, we'll see you again.